Nobody's Boy, Hector Malot. Translated by Florence Crew Jones. Chapter 16. The Padrone. Although I knew later how beautiful was the city of Paris, the slums, being my first glimpse, created anything but a favorable impression. Vitalis, who seemed to know his way, pushed through the groups of people who obstructed his passage along the narrow street we had just turned down. "Mind, you don't lose me," cautioned Vitalis. But his warning was not necessary, for I trod upon his heels, and to be more sure of him, I held a corner of his coat in my hand. We crossed a big courtyard to a dirty, dismal house where surely the sun had never penetrated. It was the worst-looking place I had seen so far. "Is Garofoli in?" asked Vitalis of a man who, by the light from a lantern, was hanging rags against the door. "I don't know. Go up and see for yourself," he growled. "The door's at the top of the stairs. It faces you." "Garofoli is the Padrone, Remy, I told you about," said Vitalis. "This is where he lives." The street, the house, the staircase was not in the nature to reassure me. What would this new master be like? Without knocking, Vitalis pushed open the door at the top of the stairs on the top floor, and we found ourselves in a large attic. There was a great empty space in the middle of the room, and all around the walls were beds, a dozen in all. The walls and ceiling that had once been white were now filthy with smoke, dust, and dirt. On the walls was a drawing of a head in charcoal and some flowers and birds. "Are you there, Garofoli?" asked Vitalis. "It is so dark I can't see anyone. It's Vitalis." A weak, drawling voice replied to Vitalis's question. "Signor Garofoli has gone out. He will not be back for 2 hours." A boy about 12 years of age came forward. I was struck by his strange looks. Even now, as I write, I can see him as I saw him then. He had no body, so to speak, for he seemed all legs and head. His great head was out of all proportion. Built so, he could not have been called handsome. Yet there was something in his face which attracted one strangely, an expression of sadness and gentleness, and yes, hopelessness. His large eyes held your own with sympathy. "You are sure he will not be back for 2 hours?" asked Vitalis. "Quite sure, signor. That will be dinner time, and no one ever serves dinner but Signor Garofoli." "Well, if he comes in before, tell him that Vitalis will be back in 2 hours." "Very well, signor." I was about to follow Vitalis when he stopped me. "Stay here," he said. "You can rest." "Oh, I'll come back," he added reassuringly, noticing my look of anxiety. "Are you Italian?" asked the boy, when Vitalis's heavy step could no longer be heard on the stairs. "No," I replied in French. "I'm French." "That's a good thing." "What? You like the French better than the Italians?" "Oh, no. I was thinking of you when I said, 'That's a good thing,' because if you were Italian, you would probably come here to work for Signor Garofoli, and I'd be sorry for you." "Is he wicked, then?" The boy did not reply, but the look he gave me spoke more than words. As though he did not wish to continue the conversation, he went over to the fireplace. On a shelf in the fireplace was an immense earthenware saucepan. I drew nearer to the fire to warm myself, and I noticed that the pot had something peculiar about it. The lid, through which a straight tube projected to allow the steam to escape, was fixed on the saucepan on one side with a hinge and on the other with a padlock. "Why is that closed with a padlock?" I asked inquisitively. "So that I shan't take any of the soup. I have to look after it, but the boss doesn't trust me." I could not help smiling. "You laugh," he said sadly, "because you think that I'm a glutton. Perhaps if you were in my place, you'd do the same as I've done. I'm not a pig, but I'm famished, and the smell of the soup as it comes out through the spout makes me still hungrier." "Doesn't Signor Garofoli give you enough to eat?" "He starves us." "Oh." "I'll tell you what I have done," went on the boy, "'cause if he's going to be your master, it will be a lesson for you. My name is Matia. Garofoli is my uncle. My mother, who lives in Lucca in Italy, is very poor and has only enough for herself and my little sister Christina. When Garofoli came to beautiful Lucca last year, he brought me back with him. Oh, it was hard to leave my little sister. Signor Garofoli has a lot of boys here. Some of them are chimney sweeps, others rag pickers, and those who are not strong enough to work sing in the streets or beg. Garofoli gave me 2 little white mice to show to the public, and I had to bring him back 30 sous every night. As many sous as you are short a day, so many blows you get. It is hard to pick up 30 sous, but the blows are hard too, especially when it's Garofoli who gives them. So I did everything that I could to get the money, but I was often short. Nearly all the other boys had their money when they returned at night, but I scarcely ever had mine, and Garofoli was mad. There is another boy here who also shows mice, and he's taxed 40 sous, and he brings that sum back every night. Several times I went out with him to see how he made it." He paused. "Well?" I asked. "Oh, the ladies always said, 'Give it to the pretty little one, not the ugly boy.' The ugly one, of course, was I, so I did not go out with him any more. A blow hurts, but it hurts more to have things like that said, and before a lot of people. You don't know that because no one has ever told you that you are ugly. Well, when Garofoli saw that beating me didn't do any good, he tried another way. Each night he took away some of my supper. It's hard, but I can't say to the people in the streets who are watching my mice, 'Give me something or I won't get any supper tonight.' They don't give for that reason." "Why do they give?" "Because you are pretty and nice, or because you remind them of a little boy they've lost, not because they think you're hungry." "Oh, I know their ways. Say, ain't it cold today?" "Awful cold." "I didn't get fat on begging," went on the boy. "I got so pale, and then after a time, I often heard people say, 'That poor child is starving to death.' A suffering look does what good looks can't do, but you have to be very starved for that. They used to give me food. That was a good time for me, because Garofoli had stopped giving me blows just then to see if it would hurt me more to go without supper. So when I got something to eat outside, I didn't care. But one day Garofoli came along and saw me eating something, a bowl of soup that the fruiterer gave me. Then he knew why I didn't mind going without supper at home. After that, he made me stay at home and look after the soup here. Every morning before he goes out, he puts the meat and the vegetables into the saucepan and locks the lid on, and all I have to do is to see that it boils. I smell the soup, but that's all. The smell of the soup doesn't feed you. It makes you more hungry. Am I very white? As I never go out now, I don't hear people say so, and there's no mirror here." "You don't seem any paler than others," I said. "Ah, you say that because you don't want to frighten me, but I'm glad I'm sick. I want to be very ill." I looked at him in amazement. "You don't understand," he said with a pitiful smile. "When one is very ill, they take care of you or they let you die. If they let me die, it will be all over. I shan't be hungry anymore, and there'll be no more beatings. And they do say that when we die, we go up and live with God. Then, if I'm up there, I can look down on Mama and Christina, and I can ask God not to let my little sister be unhappy. Also, if they send me to the hospital, I shall be pleased." The hospital? No matter how sick I felt while tramping across the country, if I thought I might be sent to the hospital, I always found strength to go on. "I'm quite ill now, but not ill enough to be in Garofoli's way," he went on in his weak, drawling voice. "But I'm getting weaker. Garofoli, fortunately, hasn't given up beating me entirely. He beat me on the head 8 days ago, and look, it's all swelled out now. You see here? This big bump? He told me yesterday it was a tumor, and the way that he spoke, I believe that it's something serious. It hurts awful. I'm so giddy at night when I put my head on the pillow, I moan and cry. So I think in 2 or 3 days he'll decide to send me to the hospital. I was in the hospital once, and the sisters speak so kind to you. They say, 'Put out your tongue, little boy,' and 'There's a good boy,' every time you do anything they tell you to do. I think I am almost had enough now to be sent there." He came and stood quite close to me, fixing his great eyes on me. Even though I had not the same reason for hiding the truth from him, I did not like to tell him how terrible he looked with his great glittering eyes, his hollow cheeks, and his bloodless lips. "I should think you're ill enough to go to the hospital," I said. "At last!" With dragging limbs, he went slowly over to the table and began to wipe it. "Garofoli will be here shortly," he said. "We mustn't talk any more." Warily, he went round the table, placing the plates and spoons. I counted 20 plates. So Garofoli had 20 boys. As I only saw 12 beds, they evidently slept, some of them, 2 in a bed. What beds? What sheets? The coverlets must have been brought from the stables when they were too old and not warm enough for the horses. "Don't you come here," said the boy. "Try to get somewhere else." "Where?" "I don't know. No matter where, you'd be better than here." The door opened and a child came into the room. He carried a violin under his arm and a big piece of wood in his hand. "Give me that bit of wood," said Matia, going up to the child. But the little fellow held the piece of wood behind his back. "No," he said. "Give it me for the fire. The soup will be better." "Do you think I brought it for the soup? I've only made 36 sous today, and I thought this bit of wood might save me a beating. It's to make up for the 4 sous I'm short." "You'll have to pay, each in his turn." Matia said this mechanically, as though the thought of the boy being punished gave him satisfaction. I was surprised to see a hard look come into his soft, sad eyes. I knew later that if you live with wicked people, you'd get to be like them in time. One by one, the boys returned. Each one, as he came in, hung his instrument on a nail above his bed. Those who were not musicians, but simply exhibitors of trained animals, put their mice and guinea pigs into a cage. Then a heavy step sounded on the stairs, and a little man wearing a gray overcoat came into the room. It was Garofoli. The moment he entered, he fixed his eyes on me with a look that scared me. Matia quickly and politely gave him Vitalis's message. "Ah, so Vitalis is here," he said. "What does he want?" "I don't know," replied Matia. "I'm not speaking to you. I'm speaking to this boy." "He is coming back and he will tell you himself what he wants," I replied. "Ah, here's a little fellow who knows the value of words. You're not Italian?" "No, I'm French." The moment Garofoli entered the room, two small boys took their places, one on each side of him, and were waiting until he had finished speaking. Then one took his felt hat and placed it carefully on the bed, and the other brought forward a chair. They did this with the same gravity and respect that a choir boy waits upon a priest. When Garofoli was seated, another little boy brought him a pipe stuffed with tobacco, and a fourth offered him a lighted match. "It smells of sulphur, animal," he cried, throwing it in the grate. The culprit hastened to repair his mistake. Lighting another match, he let it burn for a time before offering it to his master. But Garofoli would not accept it. "No, you imbecile," he said, pushing the boy aside roughly. Then he turned to another child and said with an ingratiating smile, "Riccardo, dearie, bring a match." The dearie hastened to obey. "Now," said Garofoli, when he was comfortably installed and his pipe burning, "now to business, my little angels. Bring the book, Matia." Garofoli made a sign to the boy who had lit the first match. "You owe me a sou from yesterday. You promised to bring it today. How much have you brought?" The child hesitated for a long time, his face showing distress. "I'm 1 sou short," he said at last. "Ah, you're 1 sou short. It's not the sou for yesterday, it's a sou for today." "That makes 2 sous. I've never seen the like of you." "It's not my fault." "No excuses. You know the rules. Undo your coat. 2 blows for yesterday, 2 for today, and no supper for your impudence. Riccardo, dearie, you're a good boy and you deserve some recreation. Take the strap." Riccardo, the child who had lit the second match, took down from the wall a short-handled whip with 2 leather-knotted straps. Meanwhile, the boy who was short 2 sous was unfastening his coat. Then he dropped his shirt, baring his body to the waist. "Wait a minute," said Garofoli with an ugly smile. "You won't be the only one, perhaps. It's always pleasant to have a companion." The children stood motionless before their master. At his cruel joke, they all forced a laugh. "The one who laughed most is the one who is short the most," said Garofoli. "I'm sure of that. Who laughed the loudest?" All pointed to the boy who had come home first, bringing his piece of wood. "How much are you short, you there?" demanded Garofoli. "It's not my fault." "And the one who says, 'It's not my fault,' will get an extra cut. How much is missing?" "I brought back a big piece of wood, a beautiful piece of wood." "That's something. But go to the baker's and ask him to exchange your wood for bread. Will he do it? How many sous are you missing? Speak out." "I've made 36 sous." "You're 4 short, you rogue. And you can stand there before me like that? Down with your shirt. Riccardo, dearie, you're going to have a good time." "But the bit of wood," cried the boy. "I'll give it to you for supper." This cruel joke made all the children who were not to be punished laugh. All the other boys were then questioned as to how much they had brought home. Ricardo stood with whip in hand until 5 victims were placed in a row before him. "You know, Ricardo," said Garofoli, "I don't like to look on, because a scene like this always makes me feel ill. But I can hear, and from the noise I am able to judge the strength of your blows. Go at it heartily, dearie. You are working for your bread." He turned towards the fire as though it were impossible for him to witness this chastisement. I, in my corner, trembled with indignation and fear. This was the man who was going to be my master. If I did not bring him back the 30 or 40 sous that he demanded of me, I should have to be whipped by Ricardo. Ah, I understood now how Matia could speak of death so calmly. The first lash of the whip, as it cut into the flesh, made the tears spring to my eyes. I thought that I was forgotten, but I made a mistake. Garofoli was looking at me out of the corner of his eye. "There's a boy with a heart," he said, pointing to me. "He is not like you other rogues. You laugh when you see your comrades suffer. Take this little comrade for an example." I trembled from head to foot. Their comrade! At the second blow, the victim uttered a wail. At the third, a piercing shriek. Garofoli lifted his hand. Ricardo stopped with raised whip. I thought Garofoli was going to show mercy, but it was not so. "You know how much it hurts me to hear you cry," said Garofoli, gently addressing the victim. "You know that if the whip tears your skin, your cries pierce my heart. So then I warn you that for each cry you will receive another slash, and it will be your own fault. If you have any affection or gratitude, you will keep silent. Go on, Ricardo." Ricardo raised his arm, and the strap curled on the backs of the victims. "Oh, Mama, Mama!" cried one. Thank God I saw no more of this frightening torture, for at this moment the door was thrown open, and Vitalis entered. In a glance he understood all. He had heard the shrieks while climbing the stairs. Running to Ricardo, he snatched the whip from him, then, wheeling round upon Garofoli, he stood before him with folded arms. It all happened so quickly that, for a moment, I was dumbfounded. But Garofoli quickly recovered himself and said gently, "Isn't it terrible? That child has no heart." "Shame! It's a shame!" cried Vitalis. "That is just what I say," murmured Garofoli. "Stop that!" commanded Vitalis. "It's you, not the child. What a cowardly shame to torture these poor children who cannot defend themselves." "Don't you meddle in what does not concern you, you old fool," cried Garofoli, changing his tone. "It concerns the police," retorted Vitalis. "You threaten me with the police, do you?" cried Garofoli. "Yes, I do," replied my master, nowise intimidated by the bully's fury. "Ah, Vitalis," he hissed, "so you'll talk? Well, I can talk also. Your affairs do not concern me, but there are others who are interested in you, and if I say one name, who will have to hide his head in shame?" My master was silent. Shame? His shame? I was amazed, but before I had time to think, he had taken me by the hand. "Come, Remy," he said, and he drew me to the door. "Oh," cried Garofoli, now laughing, "I thought you wanted to talk to me, old fellow." "I have nothing to say to you." Then without another word, We went down the stairs, he still holding me tightly by the hand. With what relief I followed him. I had escaped from that tyrant. If I had dared, I would have thrown my arms around Vitalis' neck. End of chapter 16.